let's give this thing a little test run. What is up, YouTube? And if you can't tell already, my RZR's got a twin. Let's go. This was picked up by our good buddy Taylor. He's getting back into off-roading with us, and we are excited. Now, we obviously have some differences between the two RZRs. Now, they are both 2015s, like I said. They are both around 2,900 miles, and they are both around between 250 and 280 hours on them. So they are very, very similar to each other. Obviously same color, all that good stuff, but there's some differences as well. He's got a little bit more robust tree kickers on the side, and he does have the rear frame support all the way to the back. I do like that a lot. That looks good. Low profile pre-runner style bumper. He has a winch recessed in the front. I like mine mounted out, but who's going to argue with it? It came on it when he got it. You got to take it. I mean, pretty killer if it comes with a winch. That also works. I obviously have the 3-inch lift. Mine sits up a little higher, and his is sitting factory ride height roughly. It is getting a little low rider action going. This is pretty common with 900s. I think even the 1000s as well. The tender springs, you can see these in the rear here are all compressed and touching. And over here on my RZR, you can see there's gap. Now, it's not the greatest. Mine are fatigued as well, but definitely not as bad as Taylor's RZR that he just got. Again, pretty common. We were aware of that. Still worth the bang for the buck, really. So that's some things I kind of want to go over. If you're in the used UTV side-by-side market, you kind of don't want to dump the money into like a brand new unit, because these things get pretty pricey. You get a lot for what you pay for, honestly, but you know, if you're balling on a budget, we understand. So just a couple of things you might want to just keep in mind if you're looking for a used RZR. Again, these are going to be kind of tailored toward these 900Ss. Obviously, this is what I got experience with, but you can take these tips with you regardless of the unit you're looking into. It's going to be really cool to compare the two together. We got a little bit of a different build approach. He's going to do a super ATV, the big 7-inch lift, but going to kind of use it more like a long travel kit. More than it for the height. And what my build plan with mine was to use arch offset control arms, so you get a little bit of a stretch front and rear, lengthen out that wheelbase, and then either keep the 3-inch lift that's already applied or go to like a small 4-inch portal style lift, and then also get a little width from that as well. So we have two different approaches. It's going to be very cool to kind of see how they compare together. So make sure y'all follow along with that. Made it real easy for you. You can see the little RZR in the corner of the screen there. Go ahead and click that. Make sure you subscribe. You can follow along on these little builds and everything else I'm getting into here at the ranch. I appreciate you. So again, the tender springs, these top ones tend to be the culprit for the most part. You can see how they're fully compressed. They're just completely wore out. Now the Other springs on them, the rears and the fronts, they're typically not that bad, but let's be honest, the factory Polaris springs aren't the greatest to begin with. Racer Tech, Shock Therapy, you got a lot of support out there for that. They can get you straightened out with a good setup, and you can get dual rates for the front, so that's a good upgrade anyway. So typically not that big of an issue. Just keep in mind, if you're looking used, these are some things you're probably going to want to replace. Also take note, this is an extended reservoir cap on this piggyback nitrogen. I have one on mine as well, so on the nitrogen reservoirs, that is not factory. Pretty common. The 900Ss and I'm pretty sure the 1000s have the same setup. Not sure about the XPs. I think there was a different shock upgrade for those, so it might not apply to them. But any of the models that don't have that Schrader valve, if it has the like needle valve, like you would fill up a basketball or like a football or something, that is the factory cap, and they're usually flush, not extended. They leak, and it'll leak all that nitrogen out, and you lose all your rebound. It's just floppy chicken in the front. The spring can't do but so much. It needs that nitrogen compressed, so just kind of keep an eye out for that. Pretty common on these. They're not that big of a deal to fix, but that can factor into what you want to pay for one, obviously, because you're going to have to repair that. I would suggest you check, just make sure you don't see any obvious bending in the shocks or at where they mount. Any looks like weld repairs, especially where your, like here, where your control arms meet the chassis, front and rear, top, bottom. Just look at all those, even some of the frame in the front and in the rear. Just make sure you don't see any bends or any weld repairs. If you get a razor that does not already have the extended reservoir caps, I was talking about earlier, make sure you check for leaking underneath that. It'll look like a valve, like a needle valve, like you would fill up like a basketball or a football or something like that on the bottom here, but it'll be kind of flat instead of having this cap here. The other thing too, in addition to that, you can check your shocks for leaking here and at top around the shock head at the top there as well. Just make sure you don't see any fluid like running down, sign that the got some damage going on. I've said this in another video with my razor, but the factory bushings and the control arms are garbage. Just replace them. Just get it in your mind, especially if you're buying used, get them replaced. They're just all terrible. Just do yourself a favor. And what I mean is these bushings here where the control arms meet, and you also have bushings on the inside of the knuckle where the wheel is. Just go ahead and just replace all those. Take a step back and look, especially on the S's. You can kind of tell now that rear tire is like cambered in at the top. Got some negative camber going on. That is caused by a few things. Could be a really wore out wheel bearing. Check those. Typically you can just kind of pull on the wheels and you can kind of feel if it's got some play there. The best way to tell really is to actually jack it up, and you can see if there's a lot of side to like inward and outward movement on the wheel, and that'll tell you if your wheel bearings are really wore out. If they're really bad, you can tell with it sitting with weight on it, because you pull on it, you can kind of feel it shake some. That means they're just shot. So you're going to have to replace those. Again, not terrible, but something that can factor into how much you're going to pay for one. The other thing is also those bushings. If those bushings wear out, those control arms just get that play in, and then that cocks the top of that wheel in. So that's another contributing factor to that. So don't panic if you see that. Just kind of, those are some things you're probably going to have to replace to correct that negative camber that you get. The other contributing factor to that negative camber that you'll get in the rear is the spring sag again. Just as they sag and the vehicle lowers, it gives you that negative camber. My razor did it. This one's doing it. I know that's going to be a pretty common issue on the S models, at least up to like 2019, maybe 2020 models. I don't know if they did something different there to fix that, but I know your early ones, 15, 16, 17s, that they're all going to do it. Another thing to look out for is a skid plate. I know that sounds silly, but my razor did not have a skid plate on it when I got it. I got mine closer to the Virginia border, rode a lot of Hatfield McCoys, and when I looked underneath it, the whole bottom of it was just a little gnarled and rusty because there was no skid plate. It was getting banged up with rocks and sand and grit, and I had to wire wheel it down and paint it so it wouldn't keep rusting, and it wasn't bad. Like, I didn't have to do any weld repairs or anything like that, but it was a lot of work, and I put a full body skid plate on it. Taylor's has one, very nice super ATV all the way front and rear. Now, obviously, if the person you're purchasing the vehicle will allow you to do so, check all your fluids, especially the oil on these. Little door right here, you just pull that, the dipstick's right behind here. Don't want any like flaking, obviously. I see like little sparklies in it, not good. If it looks like real black, used, wore out oil, it's probably a good sign it might not have been maintained very well. So something you might want to take into your decision making process. Coolant is here, just make sure it's got the proper level. This one's fine. Make sure, again, it's kind of green looking, doesn't look like brown muddy water looking. That means it's probably been like submerged or something, possibly at one point in time, maybe. Obviously, crank it up. And you're going to put it through all the gears. Now, even if you're not really, again, even if you're not really quite sure, you don't want any like wild noises, even if you're not exactly sure what to look for. I mean, it shouldn't sound like a bucket of bolts banging around back there. So one thing I want y'all to keep in mind, especially with these 900s, I'm not sure about the 1000s or anything else. I just know it's kind of a common thing with these 900s. I've seen it all over the forums. I've seen it on other YouTube videos, other people with RZRs. Let's see if I can get y'all to hear it here. I don't know if y'all can hear that little bit of clunking right there, right on the first startup, especially a cold startup on these. That was my RZR. My RZR's always done it. Taylor's does it too on cold startup. Once they warm up, you don't really hear it that much. I've heard people on forums say that it's like a cam tensioner. You get aftermarket when you can tighten it up, and this still didn't solve their problem. I've seen people have testimonies where they got 7,000 plus miles on their RZR, never touched it, and it makes that noise, and it's just always made the noise, and they just don't worry about it. So just kind of watch out for that. Don't be like alarmed by that noise. It's pretty common. As long as it calms down pretty quickly, it typically does. So just let it run for a minute. Run through your gears. If you got an area where you're at purchasing the vehicle that you can kind of give it a little test run, I highly suggest you do so. But just, you know, reverse, make sure it goes in reverse. Make sure you're not getting a lot of like noise, obviously, especially when you're changing high, low gears. So make sure you're not getting any kind of grinding, kind of going in the gears without too much muss or fuss. It's a good sign. This one's pretty smooth. Keep in mind that sometimes with these transmissions, because they're all in a line here, it's kind of easy to maybe get like in between a gear. So kind of just make sure you're all the way in gear before applying the gas, because I've done it on mine plenty of times. You kind of get halfway in between and it'll grind. So just kind of pay attention. Your four-wheel drive, it's kind of hard to test that. Should be on, lights indicating that it's on, but the only real way to tell that is to either put it off the ground, or if you got somewhere you can test drive it and get it into something kind of slick or whatever and rolls the front tires over, then you know it's working at that point. You can sometimes kind of hear these Hilliard clutches and these front diffs engage, like if you turn real hard, sometimes you can hit it, kind of give that little roar to it. Mine does it sometimes. These front diffs are not the greatest on these things, so if you're getting a lot of roaring and noise from the front, just might be something that's probably going to have to be replaced. Again, mine's a ticking time bomb, pretty common. These 900s and the 1000Ss, the XP's got an upgraded front diff. This sounds pretty obvious, but make sure your brakes work. Inspect all your calipers. The main thing which you really want to look for, one of the main things you really want to look for, is crank up this one. It's CVT belt. You can hear a lot of banging and clanging around in here. You might have some clutch issues. One thing to notice in these CVT transmission vehicles, on your start engaging, regardless of gear, typically going to get a little bit of like a stutter or kind of like a jerk. That's pretty normal. That's kind of how the CVT operates. Now, obviously, it shouldn't be like super aggressive. You shouldn't get like a ka-choo, like a big clunk. But keep in mind, like it's just kind of how they work. So just kind of pay attention. This one's actually not that bad, but some of them, it's pretty common. If you're applying a lot of gas and it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere, and you smell like a burnt, like rubber smell, then it's probably not gripping the belt and the belt's smoked. So the belt probably have to be replaced, or you got some kind of clutching issue or something like that. Steering play, the rack and pinions can wear out. So typically you turn the steering wheel, and I'm not getting hardly any movement. The front tire's wiggling just a little bit. I don't know if y'all can really see that much on the camera, but we got quite a bit of play here. So it's probably a little bit of wear in the rack. And you can also see here the boot for your tie rod is split. So there's probably some wear in there, some water and mud and stuff's probably gotten in there. So that's probably going to have to be replaced, at least maybe that joint. I know Taylor, I've already talked to him. He's going to replace the whole rack and pinion with the heavy duty version, the 2.0 from Super ATV. Got to make sure a couple things are going to work for the lift kit, but we're already going to be replacing that, so that wasn't a huge deal to us. Make sure the tie rods aren't bent, obviously. That can affect like your toe and how well it steers. Obviously, your tie rod ends. I don't know if I can give y'all a good shot, but right here, no. There's a little bit of play there. So those are probably got some wear. Ball joints, they're going to be kind of hard to tell unless they're really wore out. Your shock bushings here, mine are wore out on mine, my RZR. I mean, his aren't bad, but mine need to be. CV axles, front and rear. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say I've looked at this all over the place, and it seems to be kind of common. I feel like it's excessive. A bunch of RZRs do this, but the front, and his is just like it, and mine is too. Well, let me get y'all over here. There's a ton of play in the fronts. Mine does it too. I've looked at all the forums, XPs. Like, I guess there's just a lot of tolerance there. I feel like that's a little excessive, but I don't know what to do about it. I actually bought brand new axles when I first got mine because of that, and it did the same thing. So my diff's a ticking time bomb. I'm mulling around in my head, maybe rebuilding it using the Sandcraft like bomb-proof kit and just replacing the bearings and stuff and just see how much longer it'll last. But anywho, it's just mainly you don't want your boots to be torn. All his boots look to be okay. Clicking, like, especially if you can test drive it. A little short test drive can tell you a lot. Full all the way lock, turn. Make sure you don't hear any popping or clicking or kind of like binding from the front. That'll typically tell your CV axles are wore out, the joints anyways. And again, like I said, just check the boots. You'll normally see grease slung around and everything. One other thing to check, if you can now, you gotta kind of have to be careful with who you're buying stuff from. Kind of fill out the person. Some people kind of get it a little offensive nowadays if you really like kind of pick their stuff over. Right in the front drive line, it's a little hard to get to, but I'm just going to try to, okay, it doesn't seem to be a lot of play there. And there's actually a, I forget what you call it. It's a pin that goes in from the spline from the front diff into that yoke there. That locks it in, so make sure that's there. That can slip out and cause damage. And the rear, this is the problem on my RZR. Trying to get the shot cleaned out so I can get in there, but the rear here, let's see if I can get my hand in here so y'all can see. His is not bad. Mine, right in here, flip-flops around. I think that's where a lot of my noise and clunking's coming from, so I'll be doing a video on that. Some other good things to check when you're looking at a used side-by-side. If it has a bumper on it, you can kind of see if anything's been bent. This one's new. This one's my razor, so it's not, obviously, because it's fairly new, but you know, you can check and just see welds broken, rust, if it's bent in any places. Again, it's good to check your control arms as well, especially where they connect to the chassis, or to frame, wherever you want to call it. You check for like broken welds, bad rust spots. Now mine came from up north, so again, rust, you can see I got some little pitting here. Nothing's cracked, some there, and I got some along the top here as well. I'm going to go back and hit some of that with some Rust-Oleum, wire brush it down, hit it with some Rust-Oleum just to keep it from getting any worse, but just, it's not that bad. With the front and rear bumpers, also you can look at your roll cage, make sure you don't see any bends. Typically you'll get damage on the bodies too if it's been rolled. Some of the brush like stuff, that's pretty normal, like swiping down the side, just going through trails and stuff. But definitely the roll cage. You can look at your roof too. If you have a roof that's like kind of bent or on one end or curled in, you know it's probably got rolled over or tipped over. Just stand back and look at it, just make sure it doesn't look all wonky. That's a really important thing, really, because that means it's already kind of weak. Just something you need to, you know, take into consideration if you're looking at a used one. It helps if you have somebody with you, obviously, but you know, you just make sure all your lights and switches work, your brake lights, if it has any LED bars, stuff like that. I have a fan override that works. Easier if you got somebody with you to kind of help check all that stuff, especially the brake lights. Now I've just cleaned my razor out real good, and you can kind of still see got a little bit of leftover sand and stuff. If you see a lot of buildup of just mud and debris up in the skid plates, that's a good sign that it wasn't really cleaned out very well, and that's probably a good indication that it may not have been taken care of and maintained. So these little hard to get to little pockets, some people just don't really pay attention to that, and they'll just give it a little spritz over just because it's so it kind of looks a little clean, but they don't really get down into the cracks and crevices. So those are just some small things just to kind of look, just to kind of help you guys get pointed in the right direction. I'm not an expert on any of these things. Overall, I think Taylor did really good on this razor. The seats aren't in the best condition, neither are mine. Again, that's a common thing. The seat material, especially if they spend any time outdoors, they just start to crack. So not a huge problem, but they can get pretty bad. Taylor's are better than mine, so just something that's pretty common on them. But overall, this has been a pretty solid unit. We've given it some test drives around the ranch out here. We got us a nice little mock-up of a track. So again, hit that subscribe and stay tuned, because I got some stuff coming up. I'm trying to get this stuff together so we can really have some fun. But if you enjoy this sort of thing, make sure you follow along. I appreciate you guys taking the time. I hope this video helps somebody who's maybe getting into the used side-by-side market. I appreciate y'all taking the time to tune in, and I will catch you guys on the next one.